Social structures are like the mountains. They don't come from the earth, though. They come from human experience. What about the social structures that have emerged over 1,000,000 years? They all express external power. Every one of them. Healthcare, education, commerce, governance, jurisprudence. Not only do we have them, and they're all built on external power, express external power, teach external power, support external power. External power is now toxic. That means that none of our social structures serve our evolution any longer, and they are all disintegrating. How do we change human experience? Now we come to the heart of it. Look around you. The change that's happening in human history, in human awareness, in human consciousness is happening in you. Then how can you change social structures? Change you. That's the only way. Welcome back. We have an interesting topic to discuss this time. What to do about disintegrating social structures? Whose social structures? Our social structures. How many of them? All of them. Why are they disintegrating? Well, that's the next question. The one right now is, what are we going to do about them? First of all, let's look at what a social structure is. Think of it by analogy as a mountain. Where do mountains come from? They come from the earth. Every time there's a volcanic eruption that goes deep down into the magma of the earth and brings that up to the surface as volcanic flow, it builds upon the earth. Every time there's a collision between enormous tectonic plates far below the surface of the earth, boom, entire mountain ranges suddenly appear. That's what mountains are, and that's where they come from. Well, by analogy, social structures are like the mountains. They don't come from the earth, though. They come from human experience. Out of human experience, over hundreds of thousands of years, and in fact, in this case, millions of years, emerge what we're calling social structures. For example, the social structure of education. Where did that come from? It came from a long time ago when people were discovering, our ancestors were discovering very significant things like fire. That was a big one. And then came describing to someone else how to build a fire. Well, that came quite a ways down the line. Initially, it was probably lightning striking a tree and setting it on fire. And humans, or our predecessors, being close enough to see that happen and be terrified by it, and also realize that the burning tree was warm, it was hot. And as they got closer, they realized it were the flames that were hot. And then they made a big jump in human evolution. They realized if they could pick up one of those burning things, we'd call it a branch, and take it into a cave, it made the cave lighter and it made it warmer. And then how to share this experience with others became something that was important to do. That's the beginning of education. Can you see it? Where you find a well, and you're in a desert climate, so we'd call it an oasis. Now, how to get back there and to share that with people, that information is now contributing to what we will call 1,000,000 years later, the social structure of education. What about the social structure of health? That would begin also a long time ago when our predecessors began to realize that there are certain things they could do to make people who were suffering feel better, that there were certain plants that they could eat or smoke or drink that would ameliorate certain physical conditions. And all of that contributed to what we would now call the social structure of healthcare. How about business? Same thing. I was visiting the Big Island in Hawaii once, and I was taken by my Hawaiian friends to a huge valley. Now, also on Maui, there are valleys too, huge valleys. If you get lost in one, you might not ever be able to get out. And people lived in those valleys. I won't say in prehistoric times because I'm talking about them, so there is a history of them. And Native Hawaiians go into those valleys now, and they gather those herbs and plants that are healthy. Well, that was part of the social structure of education and medicine. Then the people who were far back in the valleys, quite a ways up the slope, and they had their encampments along streams that were running all the way down to the mouth of the valley, would follow those streams down sometimes, and you know where it would go? It would go to the ocean. And at the ocean, there were other encampments of Hawaiians. And since they didn't have telephone, telegraph, internet, even semaphore, which wouldn't do any good in the rainforest, they had a connection with others of their own kind. And they noticed that the others of their own kind had skills and tools that they didn't. These people by the ocean, by the big water, had boats that could float on it. Amazing. And they had amazing looking ornaments on them. Call them shells. Now, the people from way up the valley love those shells. And they also got introduced to something else, fish, eating fish. That was a good thing for them too. So now, how are they going to get some shells, much less fish, when they're living way up the valley, a day's travel up the valley? They say, well, we have something from up the valley that you might like to have. And let's just say we call it a banana. So now we have the beginning of trade. People up the valley bring down to the ocean things that they know the people at the ocean want and can use, and in reverse. This is the formation of what we would call the social structure of commerce. So what I want to accomplish by giving you this history is this, that it's not that easy to change a social structure. We didn't sit down together somewhere and by committee plan it. It emerged from human experience, and it's still expressing human experience. What is the thing in human experience, the common thing, the common experience, the common need that is everywhere with every human who is 5 sensory? Anybody got an idea? I do. It's survival. That is what drove our evolution when we were 5 sensory. That means when our consciousness was the old consciousness, which was limited to the perceptions of the 5 senses, to what we can see and smell and taste and touch and hear. We were a 5 sensory species that was evolving by surviving, and survived by pursuing the ability to manipulate and to control. Now we can call that today external power, manipulation and control. But you can see for a 5 sensory species, it was essential. It was essential to our survival, and we weren't evolving if we weren't surviving. That need for survival, that primal, elementary, fundamental need to survive that has been fueling our evolution since we had predecessors as humans, is now changing, because we are in the midst of a fundamental, epic, unprecedented change in human consciousness. And it has never happened before. That's what unprecedented really means. in this case, never happened before. And it's happening now very fast. A new consciousness is emerging in hundreds of millions of us. This consciousness is not confined to the perceptions of the five senses. And it has an entirely different understanding of power. The new consciousness understands power as alignment of the personality with the soul, with harmony and cooperation and sharing and reverence for life. This is now how we evolve. This is the driving energy of humanity now. Not survival. Survival, of course, is necessary, but it's no longer sufficient. It doesn't satisfy. This is not where we're going. We weren't born just to survive, but 5th-century humans were. About half of us or so, you could say, are 5th-century and the other multi-sensory. That's because we're about midway through this transformation of consciousness. This doesn't mean that we who are multi-sensory are superior in any way to those who are 5th-century. This is simply a temporary ebb and flow in evolution. And within another generation or two, we'll all be multi-sensory. Definitely not authentically powerful unless we choose to create authentic power, which is a new potential of the new consciousness. But we'll talk about that later. Now we're talking about the replacement of survival and survival through the pursuit of external power with evolution through growing spiritually and growing spiritually through creating authentic power. Alignment of the personality with the soul, the ability to distinguish between love and fear in yourself and choose love no matter what is happening inside you or what is happening outside you. Well, this is a game changer to say the least. And by that, I don't mean the game we were playing before has changed. I mean, we have a new game. It's evolution through spiritual growth. It's spiritual growth through creating authentic power. Now, what about the social structures that have emerged over 1 million years or more? They all express external power. Every one of them. Health, care, education, commerce, governance, jurisprudence. Every one of our social structures is built on the experiences of external power. Teaches external power and how to pursue it. Explains external power. Supports external power. There you have it. Our social structures are obsolete because they no longer serve the survival of a multisensory species. But we've got them. Not only do we have them, and they're all built on external power, express external power, teach external power, support external power. External power is now toxic. External power and the pursuit of it now produces only violence and destruction. That means that none of our social structures serve our evolution any longer. And they are all disintegrating. So now we've come to the first question. What are they? They emerge from human experience. The second is, why are they all disintegrating now? Because human experience has changed and is changing. And within a few generations will have changed completely. And we've still got these social structures like mountains that emerged from the old consciousness. What do we do about that? That is the topic of this podcast. Well, you can see that since we didn't create social structures by committee and by conscious decisions, because we all got together and we said, let's have a social structure, let's call it education. Let's call this one health and this one commerce. Well, obviously, that's an absurdity. But you can see how deeply rooted in human experience our social structures are, and how dramatically and radically human experience is changing and has changed. Now we come to the question what to do about these disintegrating social structures. And I brought us back to this question again because, from the perspective of the old consciousness, we need to do something. We need to replace these social structures with social structures that work, that are based on something that is essential to our evolution. So let's get together and change the social structure. But you can't. We can't. No one can. Social structures emerge out of human experience. So human experience is the origin of our social structures, and it is changing. How do we change human experience? Now we come to the heart of it. Where is the change in human experience happening? Look around you. Well, you can see some things seem to be positive. For example, we're all becoming aware that our behavior as a species has damaged our environment considerably, namely the weather, the climate. And although we were very slow to recognize this, we have recognized it. Governments around the world, even the most self-centered, and they're all self-centered completely, realize that treaties are necessary, that cooperation is necessary to reduce CO2, carbon dioxide production, to capture what's in the atmosphere and keep it in the ground. Well, that's a good thing. But you look around you and you see as many things that are still as negative, destructive, brutal, and powerfully influencing us as anything ever has in human history. We see nations with great external power in continual conflict. We haven't seen that open conflict between great nations since World War II, and then it was awesome. 80 million people died. 80 million people died in World War II. And so now governments even do their best to avoid that kind of open conflict. And it's very difficult when one government, like Russia, invades a smaller country like the Ukraine. So that's going on, and that's not so good. Because a lot of these larger governments are armed with nuclear weapons, any one or two of which could destroy human life. How can that happen? If a nuclear explosion is large enough, it lifts into the upper atmosphere, into the stratosphere, ash and radioactive dust, and it covers the Earth in the stratosphere, surrounds it, engulfs it, and it blocks out the sun. The radiance, the light, and the warmth of the sun. That's what's called a potential nuclear winter. That's not so good. That's the end of many of the life forms that are on the Earth now, maybe ours. So, what do we do about disintegrating social structures? The old consciousness says do something, build something, construct something, change something. But we look around, what are we going to change? We've already been trying to change awareness about climate disruption. We've already trying to convince one another that it's really a good thing to cooperate, to care for one another. And others of us are doing their best to convince us that Mexicans coming over the U.S. border are rapists and thieves and should be locked up, kept out, or recognized for what they are, which is a lower life form. That's not so good because it violates everything that we know about authentic power, harmony, cooperation, sharing, and reverence for life. So now, what are we left to do with the question, what to do about disintegrating social structures? The answer is take a careful look at their origin. Where are these changes happening? It's not just greater awareness of changes in the atmosphere that are deleterious to life, that are harmful to life. You can't go outside and say, here it is, we're going to change it, lock it up, bury it, incarcerate it, ship it overseas, maybe to a smaller country like we ship our garbage. You can't do that now because the change that's happening in human history, in human awareness, in human consciousness is happening in you. Connect the dots. If this change in human consciousness is happening in you, and social structures emerge out of human consciousness, then how can you change social structures? Change you. That's the only way. That's the only way. Five sensory consciousness objects. That's absurd. That's ridiculous. It's ludicrous. It's narcissistic. It's solipsistic. It has nothing to do with reality because from the perception of the old consciousness, there is an uncrossable barrier between in here and out there. And from that perception, it is nonsensical to think that inner transformation can change the world. That uncrossable barrier is not a part of the new consciousness. And that is part of the game changer, the game replacer. That is the game replacement for the old consciousness, the new consciousness. What do you contribute to the world with your consciousness? Here we come to something very interesting. You choose that. When you're unconscious, you don't choose that. You act. When you're angry, you shout. When you're jealous, you withdraw. You don't think, I'm going to act angry, I'm going to withdraw. You just do it. That's acting unconsciously. That's acting unconsciously with an energy that is a part of your personality. It originates in fear. And when you act on it, it creates painful consequences for you. It is possible for multisensory humans to become aware of what they are experiencing and not act on it unconsciously. That is called creating authentic power. It is possible to become aware of your emotions and not act on them. This requires some tools, and they're all on the Seat of the Soul website and in the books that Linda Francis and I have co-created. Emotional awareness, responsible choice, consulting intuition. When you choose to act on a loving part of your personality, such as gratitude, appreciation, patience, contentment, awe of the universe, while you are experiencing a frightened part, such as anger, jealousy, competitiveness, resentment, inferiority, superiority, that is the moment of creating authentic power. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's where change happens. That's where change happens, where change is happening, and that's in you, in your consciousness. And that's absurd, says the old consciousness again. Not the new consciousness. It knows that's not absurd. It senses that that is the only way that change is going to come. Gandhi knew it. Gandhi said it in his own terms. So now you need to experiment with this. Could it possibly be so? It's completely nonsensical, and it is. It's incomprehensible, and it is to the intellect. Your intellect is designed to work with the five senses. It surveys five sensory experience and concludes and deduces what it learns and presents that to the personality to assist it in pursuing external power, which now produces violence and destruction. None of that works. The intellect cannot comprehend, cannot express, cannot communicate, cannot accept, and has no use for the new consciousness. But the new consciousness is emerging in you. That's where we are now. You can contribute. Not can. Well, can, yes. You contribute to social structures by your choices of love or fear. That's part of the new terrain. We've never been in this terrain before. If you don't pay attention to your choices, you contribute fear. And that's what has built all of the painful and threatening circumstances that surround us now. Or you can choose to respond with love. And that introduces a new energy. And that's the only way we can change a world. You can change a world that's built on external power. You can't change it with more external power. That just adds more to what it's already built of. It requires authentic power. And that's what all of these podcasts are about. So I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation with you. In the meantime, I have a soul step for you. Write in your journal or speak into your phone, record into your phone. First of all, what you are most resonant with that you've heard me speak about in this podcast. It might be something negative. For example, that's absurd. It's ridiculous to think that I can change myself and change the world. Write that down. That comes from a frightened part of your personality. If you resonate with anything else, write it down. For example, is there really a difference between the inside and the outside? Yes, of course there is, but is there really? If you have that question, write that down. And then start to look at this when you get home. If you already are home, when you have some time. If you don't have time, make some time. Because what we're talking about is your own life, your own consciousness, your own contributions to the earth school, yes. To your neighborhood, yes. To your family, yes. And even to more than that, to the universe. How can that be? We'll discuss that too in future podcasts. I'm looking forward to being with you again. I'm Gary Zukav.